The revolution is real, it's live, and as some comrades say, it's lit, right? Lit. The revolution is lit.
Hello, comrades, and welcome to today's Amalia Attila Sunday Study featuring Chairman Amalia Attila. My name is Amalia Attila. I'm the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study is highly important, and we encourage you right now to share this stream, invite your friends and family to it so that as many of our people can be involved in this discussion. This week, the chairman continues with Vanguard Up, Unity of Theory and Practice, the political report to the first Seventh Congress Plenary of the African People's Socialist Party, resuming from the section, The International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, InPDUM, on page 53. You can find the study materials in the Facebook and YouTube descriptions. In this study, the chairman begins reporting on the work of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, the mass organization formed by and under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party in 1991 to defend the rights of the African community and create an organization that would serve the task of bringing African workers into the folds of revolutionary life once again, following the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, currently led by President Columbai and Dinette and headquartered out of St. Louis, Missouri. Then we discussed the work of our party work on the continent of Africa, including the dynamic work happening under the leadership of Tafari Mugere, the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, Occupy Tanzania, or South Africa. This allows us to discuss the work of the party everywhere and demonstrates the practical manifestation of the African Socialist International. We will begin to discuss how through the African Socialist International, the African working class is defining itself and the new African proletariat nation that will come into existence as a consequence of defeating imperialism and colonial capitalism. It is an honor to be able to study this document, which serves as a blueprint for making a revolution with not only the author himself, but the leader of the African People's Socialist Party, the African Internationalist strategist, our leadership, Chairman Amalia Attila. Uhuru.
Uhuru, comrade. I want to thank Comrade Attila for the introduction. And the first thing I'd like to do is to really express a happy revolutionary birthday to Comrade Asa Anpu, who is the Secretary General of the African Socialist International for the work of Africa, for South Africa. He is an extraordinary comrade, and I was just reading this morning comments made about him from the chair of the African People's Socialist Party in Occupy Tanzania, or South Africa as it's called, and the comrade who is also responsible for organizing the party throughout Africa. And Comrade Tafari, who is the chair, was really holding up Comrade Asa for the fact that it was Asa who introduced him to the African People's Socialist Party and African Internationalism. And he has been an extraordinary force there in occupied Tanzania or South Africa. And I just really wanted to just express my appreciation that this young brother has survived another year under colonialism to continue to fight this beast that we have been confronted with for the last 600 years. So happy birthday, comrade. Happy revolutionary birthday. Also, I just wanted to say that some people will be surprised, I guess, that we are handling these studies as usual. This is partially because of how so many people are hunkered down now, trying to deal with the coronavirus or COVID-19 as it has been characterized. And it is a very difficult and in many ways perilous time. But in fact, the coronavirus or COVID-19 is simply another expression of colonial terrorism that African people have had to contend with all the time. And as a party of the African working class that is responsible for providing leadership of our people all the time, dealing with colonialism in its various manifestations, it is absolutely imperative that we continue to function as the party. In fact, a while ago, I called for the creation of a People's War Commission within our party and movement that's headed up by Comrade Aisha Fields, who is the leader of who is a member of the Central Committee of the party, and also who is leader of the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project. And it is she who has had custody of this response by our party and our people in many instances to COVID-19. And she's been doing a remarkable job developing best practices and protocols and things like that for how our work is going to continue, because our work must continue. And the fact of the matter is that there is so much concern now about COVID-19 around the world. And it's because it is not Ebola that we're talking about that's affecting Africa, or it's not sickle cell anemia, something that simply affects African people or primarily African people. The reason COVID-19 has reached the headlines is not only because it's deadly. Africans face deadly disease all the time, but because it is something that impacts the rest of the world as well, and it is alarming for the rest of the world. The reality is that we call it colonial virus, and it is because Africans are much more susceptible to every disease, every contradiction that we see happening in the world, because we live under colonial domination, because we do not have access to our own power. We do not have access to our own resources. The real estate, African real estate just alone, it cannot be calculated in terms of value. All of the essential minerals necessary for modern commerce, for development, located in Africa. And African people have been dispersed forcibly all around the world. There's tremendous amount of resources there, but we don't have possession. We don't have control of those resources. We don't even have control of our own resources, human resources, in Africa or in the United States or in the Caribbean or any place else. So we're struggling against that. And it's because we don't have control that this thing, COVID-19, wreaks so much more havoc, and it creates so much more fear in the African communities, more than in many other communities, despite the fact that it is a fearful disease that even white people are running from. So we are continuously struggling against colonialism, and this COVID-19 is another manifestation. We think it's really important to say that, because we still have political work to do, despite the kinds of protocols that have been created. I was looking just a moment ago on Facebook and saw that the party members and Uhuru movement members in Huntsville, Alabama, out in the community posting signs on various poles in the community, warning about coronavirus, COVID-19, and talking about best practices and how we should deal with it and how people should look out for their neighbors and how people should get in touch with the headquarters of the People's War Commission that's led by Comrade Aisha. So we are taking this on, and political work is absolutely necessary for us to do. Every day we look up, we see not only, we see the ineptitude of the United States government in dealing with this thing. In fact, it's an extraordinary thing to behold. Donald Trump, US president, is holding almost daily press conferences and sometimes more than one a day. And essentially the press conferences are there as means of campaigning for the election. He is running for office, and these are campaign more than anything else because they don't reveal anything that's helpful to us in terms of dealing with this. It doesn't show any potential or capacity of the government to deal with it. No testing sites, no resources, no clinics, no anything. It's still the same capitalist economy, same capitalist system, same colonialist system that it was before coronavirus. And so what has happened, as I mentioned earlier, I've called for the creation of this commission inside the party and the Uhuru movement that is taking on this question and providing leadership for African people, not only within the United States, but also in the Bahamas, also in South Africa, and in Ghana as well. So these places and other places where we are reaching African people. Now, we're dealing with the political report to the first plenary of the Seventh Congress. The title of this political report is Vanguard Up, and we're now on page 53. The thing that is significant about this is that the political report is something that places tremendous amount of emphasis on the party's strategy, what we characterize as the regional strategy. This is within the regions where the political and economic hubs of the party and the Uhuru movement are located, where the tremendous amount of focus. This is from these hubs, we see economic work, we see the work to organize our people. We're growing organizations in every location, every community in the world. That is our objective. That's why we're in Everton West in South Africa, in Gauteng province, and various other places where a movement is located. The thing about this, of course, is that we are perfectly poised to respond to COVID-19. And this is one of the reasons why it's important for us to continue to go through these studies, because if we should follow through with the political report that came from this Seventh Congress and the first plenary of the Seventh Congress, we will be able to provide the necessary leadership for our people at this time. And this is leadership not simply to deal with the virus, not with a disease that's known as COVID-19, but to deal with the colonial virus, because the inefficiency, ineptitude, inability of the colonial capitalist state to deal with this contradiction is the basis in part for us in the party to negate the authority, power, influence of the colonial capitalist state and to replace it. This is a part of the process of replacing its influence, replacing its authority with our own influence and authority, and by providing leadership for Africans and other people who have to deal with this crisis. And again, the fundamental crisis is capitalism, is colonialism, and it's expressing itself with a sharp alacrity right now in the form of this virus. So I'm on page 53. And we start with the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, InPDUM. The existing iteration of InPDUM was organized by our party in Chicago, Illinois in 1991. We say the existing iteration because it was first organized as PDUM, People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, in 1985 in Oakland, California, as a response to the counterinsurgency that was affecting our revolutionary movement throughout the world. And in Oakland, where our national headquarters in the United States was located at the time, we organized the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement because what had happened is that the people had been pushed out of political life. And many people had become demoralized because of the assassinations and mass imprisonments that had occurred up to that time. And it's very difficult to try to pull people back into, directly back into the revolution. So we had to find the means by which we could pull people into political motion that responded to the specific kinds of contradictions that were obvious to us. It wasn't the quote unquote revolution, but it was slumlords. It was the fact that we were being made homeless all around the area. It was the fact that we were being violated by evictions, merchants in our community, by the school system, by the cops who were still killing our people at the time. And so it became necessary for us to respond to this directly. And in the process of taking on these particular kinds of contradictions, helping the people to realize that this specific contradiction that we were looking at and trying to resolve contained a universal contradiction that went beyond the rent, that went beyond the cop who committed an offense or killed somebody on the corner, but identified the fundamental contradiction of colonialism and capitalism. And so the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement became this, we put then the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. And the objective, of course, was to expose this counterinsurgency, help people to see it, defeat the counterinsurgency, help people to see it by taking on these kinds of issues and contradictions that were confronted to people and helping to bring them into political life and higher level of political activity by showing that what's happening to our children in school, what's happening with the slumlords, what's happening with the merchants in our communities, connected to a greater, profound, fundamental, universal contradiction that we know as colonial capitalism. And so it was for several years, we did that in Oakland. We built an incredibly significant, powerful movement in Oakland. And it was clear to us as a party, because we did not exist only in Oakland, that we had to make InPDUM something that was representative of the struggle of African people everywhere. And so initially, in 1991, we went into Chicago. Excuse me, we had our first convention in Chicago, founding convention for the National People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. It was a convention that was attended by African people for something like 25 different cities in 20 different states at Chicago, Illinois. We did it on September, was it September? It was April 6th, the anniversary of the police murder of Bobby Hutton in Oakland, California. And we did it in Chicago because it was the location of the brutal murder of Fred Hampton. And Fred had made the statement that you can kill the revolutionaries, but you can't kill the revolution. And we thought it was symbolic value to do it in Chicago, Fred Hampton's hometown, and to do it on the anniversary of the murder of Bobby Hutton. And the first president of InPDUM was Uhuru Njeri, who was Fred Hampton's widow. We thought the symbolism there was extremely important as well. And it was important to show the continuum of the assault of the revolution from the last period to what it was that we were building at this period. So, and then as we move forward, we began to put InPDUM down in other places around the world, and it became the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, InPDUM there. So when we say that the existing iteration was organized in Chicago in 1991, it's simply a statement that InPDUM, we had begun the work to build this movement much earlier than that. We are not the same InPDUM as then. It is the InPDUM that has developed beyond our initial errors and beyond the limitations of subsequent leaders chosen by me, the party chair. And although laws of dialectics mean that contradictions continue to exist and always will. We have built an organization that not only withstands contradictions, but that absorbs and learns from contradictions and moves our struggle ahead in the process. Our development of organization moves us beyond the era of charismatic leadership, where the success of our struggle revolves around a single individual. InPDUM continues to lead, and is in the process of doing so, despite the frequent, sometimes disruptive intrusion of colonial contradictions in the lives of some of our leaders and members. InPDUM, as an instrument of the advanced attachment, continues to create and develop other competent and devoted leaders. This is due to the tenacity of our party, determined to never retreat from the struggle to defeat colonial capitalist domination of our people and class. Our stance is to never surrender in the face of what has often seemed to be insurmountable odds. We are determined that with real African internationalist defined liberation, at least 600 years of European colonial subjugation, no one will ever dominate Africa and our people again. We are determined that with real African internationalist defined liberation, after at least 600 years of European colonial subjugation, no one will ever dominate Africa and our people again. InPDUM now functions through the leadership of its International Executive Committee. It is an executive committee that has been molded and shaped in the process of carrying out its mission as defined by the party. Once a disparate group of individuals, of idealists, liberals, and anarchists, coming from a hodgepodge of ideological views, InPDUM's executive committee is now comprised mostly of African internationalists who have learned organization and are becoming more competent every day. InPDUM has established a very promising presence in New York after years of a nominal existence following the disorder and discord left in the wake of a previous InPDUM and party leader stationed in the city and the northern region. Today, more and more Africans are coming into InPDUM. Regular political events are carried out by InPDUM that have brought into our embrace and deepened our relationship with honest African militants who respect our leadership in the struggle for African self-determination. InPDUM's work in New York has also contributed to the conditions for strengthening the presence of the Uhuru solidarity movement. InPDUM is also contributing to the growth of the party internationally. The African People's Socialist Party, occupied Azania, has worked with the InPDUM Executive Committee to organize InPDUM branches in several of the provinces of South Africa. The South African InPDUM organization has a national president, Comrade Zekele, appointed by the APSP-occupied Azania president, Tafari Mugabe. The capacity of InPDUM South Africa is benefiting from the experience and lessons of InPDUM US. InPDUM benefits from the combined experience and lessons throughout the world, from Houston, Texas to Sierra Leone, West Africa, and London, England. The ASI is now investigating the ability to establish InPDUM in Ghana, West Africa. This is the work of the advanced attachment of the African Revolution that is building everywhere, every day, to translate theory into practice. This is African internationalism, our theory of practice. Moreover, this is the theory of practice being exercised by leaders that have been and are being developed through the work of forging our revolutionary presence. These are leaders who emerged through the process of practice within our organizational structures. This is an example of how organizational tenacity, unrelenting struggle to build an actual organizational capacity to win our freedom is essential. We may suffer setbacks and disappointments, but we will never quit. And because we never quit, Because we vanguard up, we continue to develop our capacity to win. InPDUM must also begin to implement InPDUM's regional structure as laid out in its constitution. If we are to grow and scale, we must make plans to operate our mass organizations on a regional basis. This was addressed in Vanguard, the political report to the Seventh Congress. Uhuru's solidarity movement must do this as well. InPDUM must also reiterate a party campaign, InPDUM must also initiate a party campaign to win the African masses to political participation in the drive for reparations by creating a reparations certificate that all Africans can sign, indicating their personal demand for reparations. These certificates must be placed on outreach tables of the party tables of the party, and InPDUM to be signed by Africans throughout the colony who might not otherwise have an opportunity to learn about or fight for reparations without our leadership. The certificates must also allow the people to recognize InPDUM as the organization they are authorizing to collect reparations for the African nation. InPDUM must re-emphasize its work. And the thing about these reparation certificates, there's discussion on social media and in some other places about reparations. But there is not that much discussion happening in households and homes and in the communities where we live around reparations. And for that to happen, then we have to have forces on the ground in our communities talking to our people about reparations. And this work to get people to sign the reparations certificate, jobs in our universities and places where the reparations demand is not usually fought for. InPDUM must re-emphasize its work to promote our African Charged Genocide campaign that was initiated years ago. Now that InPDUM has assigned a specific coordinator for the campaign, it offers us another means by which to bring countless Africans into greater national consciousness and political awareness. Thousands of Africans have already signed the online petition, uniting with the campaign from throughout the world. Now we must send out InPDUM members and the entire Uhuru movement throughout our region, cities, and communities to get signatures, allowing each African to personally charge the US with genocide. Obviously, this will be a great assistance to our reparations work as well. Every signature on InPDUM's petition will represent growing mass political education and a nail in the coffin of our colonial capitalist domination. And having said that, for some, I know this represents a certain kind of quandary because we're talking about individuals being connected to this work during a time where the concept of social distance in order to contend with COVID-19 is something that's been talked about and fought around and even promoted by our People's War Commission. But people, comrades, many of you were in the discussion that we had on yesterday and the days before that. There are protocols and things that are established that allow us to continue to do the kind of political work that we have to do among our people and still conscious of and fighting against exposing ourselves and the community and our people to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm telling that everybody here who is not clear on that, you should go to the All African People's Development Empowerment Project website and get the kind of information necessary that's expressing how we should take on the work and what are the protocols surrounding the COVID-19 activity. Then we say that the party in occupied Tanzania and the African Socialist International. In occupied Tanzania or settler colonial South Africa, the party is active in several provinces, and the Uhuru movement is growing rapidly. The current recruitment strategy being used is to bring recruits directly into InPDUM to minimize the previous problems of new party members being unprepared to competently carry out party roles according to party standards. And the chair of our South Africa Occupied Azania Party is Comrade Tafari, a strict African internationalist who is being prepared to take on even greater area of responsibility for building the party in Africa. The role of South Africa in the struggle to liberate and unify Africa cannot be overstated. And nor can the responsibility of Comrade Tafari be overstated. Because while Comrade Tafari is the chair of the African People's Socialist Party, Occupied Azania, he is also responsible as director of organization for organizing the party throughout the continent of Africa. And it's something that he has embraced with tremendous enthusiasm. And the only reason he is not in great emotion today is because of the coronavirus. And we are talking about how to deal with that. Because he was supposed to be in Ghana by now. But if he had gone into Ghana, he would have been placed in quarantine for at least 2 weeks. And that was not something that we could deal with. But the comrades in Ghana, in meetings that we had on yesterday, the comrades in Ghana made it quite clear that they are taking the work on, that they, in fact, I want to salute all of the comrades in Ghana because I know you're in this study right now. But they are quite clear that they are prepared to take on the work, and we're going to be building in Ghana. And as soon as possible, Comrade Tafari will be able to intervene more directly. But in the interim, even over social media and through WhatsApp, we will be participating in the work in Ghana. The investment the imperialist power was made to fortify its position in Africa through the white settlers consisted of industrial development. This is in South Africa, that they denied much of the rest of Africa. Because white people went there and settled, unlike they did that in Zimbabwe, they did that in what they call South Africa, and they intended to settle in Kenya as well. As you know, they did it in places like Australia, New Zealand, and as quiet as it's kept, they did it in what they call Canada and the United States. There's settler colonies. White people came to settle. And because they did go to what is now called South, and it was done in Palestine. That's now referred to as Israel. White people went to settle. And because white people went to settle there, they built up infrastructure, and with the assistance and solidarity of white colonial powers, primarily in Europe and then in North America. So what we're saying is that the investment the imperialist powers made to fortify its position in Africa through the white settlers consisted of industrial development that they denied much of the rest of Africa. The African Internationalist capture of power in South Africa will expedite the transfer of development throughout the continent. So when we take power in South Africa, it's going to expedite our struggle to transfer development throughout the continent of Africa. Currently, the African People's Socialist Party, Occupied Azania, is planning to initiate the regional hub economic strategy with a number of plans on the drawing board. Hopefully, with the support of Comrade Deputy Chair Amalia Attila and her office, we will soon be able to begin production. And I must say that there is actual work happening now, that these discussions and plans are occurring about how to take out, to develop the regional hub strategy, the economic political hub, and Occupied Azania of South Africa. I'm on page 57, top of the page. The African Socialist International is the concrete, practical expression of African internationalism. It is the practical method through which to forcibly disperse African nations under the leadership of its advanced detachment, its general staff, assumes authority over the future of Africa and our people. We say the party is the advanced detachment, it's the general staff of the African population for the revolution. And in this general staff is made manifest of how we've taken on even this question of the coronavirus and even the study that we're doing now. We provide that leadership. The masses of the people do not have access to information, organization, theory that we come into this process with. It's just like Trump and the people in that government provide reactionary leadership for white people, generally speaking, or how other institutions of white power provide leadership for white people. They are the advanced detachment of the white population. White people don't act a certain way just because they simply came up with it on their own, but they do that because there's various sources of leadership that come from the white community. In our instance, the colonial state has killed and maligned our leadership so that we become distrustful of it, or that it doesn't exist because people have been murdered, people become terrified, terrorized, etc., even afraid to unite with leadership that represents their best interest. This is the reality that we experience. And so people say, well, why do Black people not do this and do that as white people do it? Because the leadership of African people is always, 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 always under assault. It is always being discredited. It is always somehow being attacked. And Africans do not have easy access to our own leadership. Even discussions that we're having such as this, depending on what the colonial powers that control social media, internet depend, at any given moment, they shut us down. They don't like what we see, they shut us down, they flag us, they say, this is false news. And of course, anything is false news that holds up the interests of the colonizer, of the oppressed, as compared to the interests of the colonizer or the oppressor. So we have a responsibility as the advanced detachment. We are what we call the general staff that carries out the leadership that puts in place the processes through which our people will move from one step to the other, one place to the other, in order to win our freedom. So the ASI is the organization of all party organizations everywhere. It is the means by which we establish a unified organization of professional revolutionaries committed to the liberation and unification of Africa everywhere Africans are located on the planet Earth. None of us has to ever fight for our liberation alone, in isolation from each other. We can unite our struggle and share lessons and experiences in fighting an imperialist enemy that is united in our exploitation. Imperialism has amassed a bounty of shared experiences in colonial domination that fills libraries of prestigious universities. That is true. And every day you can go to bookshops and libraries and read productions coming from Oxford University or from Harvard or from some other institution that's created by the imperialists that gives talks about how colonialism occurred, how imperialism functioned in this place and that function and in that place. So they have a bounty of experience that ordinary people do not read these books. Ordinary Africans do not read these books, but the imperialists and those who they are training to be imperialists in waiting, those who go to universities, prestigious universities, are being prepared to take over, they read these books. This is part of the studies, the classes that they go to and what have you. The African Socialist International is the practical organizational instrument for the liberation and unification of Africa. We have to remember that every party unit everywhere in the world, including inside the US, is an active part of the African Socialist International. And I have to say, including inside the US, because there's a tendency of Africans in the United States who are in the center of the shaky imperialist empire, of adopting some of the same attitudes assuming some kind of exceptionalism because we live in the United States. But the fact of the matter is that Africans in the United States are part of the African Socialist International. We can't consider ourselves the African People's Socialist Party in the United States. And then when we refer to the comrade brothers and sisters who are in occupied Tanzania, who are in Ghana, or who are in the Bahamas, or who are in Nigeria, or some other place as the African Socialist International. We're all the African Socialist International. The ASI is a concretization of our theory of one Africa, one nation. The African Socialist International is involved in the dynamic process of actualizing the African nation. We can define the African nation because we are practically involved in consolidating it. This is the African Socialist International is the organization, it's the material method by which we bring Africa together. We say the African nation is being consolidated because we are actually involved in consolidating the African nation. And we are working from one strategic center to organize and consolidate Africa and African people while in the process of defeating colonial capitalism that is responsible for growing immiseration of our people and dropping deadly diseases all over the world, and especially in Africa, among African people. Because if there was not the so-called COVID-19, then they are also using Africa as a dumping ground for toxic waste and any other thing that they have. That's why the whole concept of what they like to refer to as environmental racism is there, because our community is the dumping ground for every disease that exists. The imperialist white power put diseases in our community on a regular basis. And sometimes they don't do it just because they don't like us. They just do it because they have the power to remove a disease or a disease producing entity from their reality, from directly their world, and put it someplace else. And where they put it is where there's less power, where people do not have the power, do not have the organization to resist. Increasingly, that is not true about the majority of the people around the world. We say the African nation is a revolutionary proletarian nation that will be consolidated as part of the process of overturning direct and indirect brutish neo-colonial political domination and vicious life-limiting economic exploitation. And we say it's a proletarian nation. The African nation is. The European nation, people like to distinguish different European states as nations. For example, they would call a particular country a nation, like they would say France, or they would say England, or they would say Belgium, etc., and Switzerland. They would characterize them. We disagree with that. And that's just Europeans defining themselves for themselves and by themselves. We say that Europe itself is a nation, and it was consolidated as a bourgeois nation. It is the process of raping Africa and oppressed peoples around the world, colonizing the rest of the world, that this entity that we now know as white people consolidated themselves as one. Prior to then, we were looking at just warring tribes of white people engaged in fighting and struggling among themselves, brutal fighting, brutal struggles among themselves. And then with the advent of the so-called slave trade, where they began to capture African people, and they began to capture territories in Africa from around the world. You've heard of the so-called age of exploration and stuff like this that they have put forth to explain white people leaving this disease-ridden, unfree Europe and going to the rest of the world and capturing resources, transforming through this transfer of resources from Africa, from other places to Europe. They transformed Europe from this place of starvation and oppression to a place where their basic, what we call bourgeois democratic processes and principles were created. So it was built as a capitalist entity. The European nation was consolidated, and this is the origin of capitalism itself, as a bourgeois nation. Now, in order for African nation to consolidate itself, we have to fight the bourgeois nation. We have to remove the influence and strength and power of the bourgeoisie. We have to negate the capitalism, the imperialism that has been imposed on Africa with the liberation of African people and a whole different social system. And this is what gives us the characterization of a proletarian nation, a nation of the African working class. That's what it is that we are talking about. So we say that the African nation is a revolutionary proletarian nation. You have to say it's a revolutionary proletarian nation because it cannot be come into completion without revolution. It's going to have to overturn these hostile structures and political and economic entities that have been imposed on top of us. So we say the African nation is a revolutionary proletarian nation that will be consolidated as part of the process of overturning direct and indirect brutish neo-colonial political domination and vicious life-limiting economic exploitation. Life-limiting economic exploitation. It is our actual functioning organizational presence throughout the African world that gives life to the neo-colonial inventions that are characterized as nations. The African continent was balkanized and refashioned by European imperialists in Berlin, Germany in 1884 and 1885. The result of the distribution of the partitioned Africa among themselves are the false European contrived countries that are also commonly and incorrectly called nations. Like gods, Europeans first invented themselves as nations and then invented their not so immaculate African conceptions as their imperfect, distorted reflection. We African internationalists are the only ones who can fight for the total liberation of all Africa and all African people. We reject the self-serving European definition of the nation that was itself a product of the advent of capitalism united at the expense of the national consolidation of Africans and many others. The definition of the nation that we accept is one determined to solve the problems associated with the development of Africa and our people. It is a definition that calls for the consolidation of the African nation as a process of development, which can only occur through negation of the colonial capitalist system. We reject the false European created borders wherein the definition of the African nation is contained. We reject this in Africa, Europe and the US, Asia, or the various territories within the Americas that came as a result of stolen indigenous land and the African colonial slavery. These are imperialist serving definitions that lock Africa and the world in a permanent state of parasitic economic exploitation and political servitude. Ghana cannot fight for the total liberation and unification of Africa and our globally dispersed nation. Neither can Somalia or South Africa or Jamaica or Black Britain. At best, they can only fight for their own limited freedom and sovereignty as defined by imperialist determined assumptions of nationality. At best, we can only fight for the colonizers' definition of our freedom within the colonizers' constructed reality. As African internationalists, we do not respect the borders created by our oppressors for the purpose of dividing us and our Africa to facilitate the theft of our resources. We are Africans, and Africa is ours. Africa for Africans at home and abroad. The slogan demand advanced by Marcus Garvey more than 100 years ago resonates today with even greater alacrity among African internationalists, 21st century Garveyites. We fight for Africa wherever we are, whether on the continent, on the African continent, in Amsterdam or Mississippi, USA. This is the practical application of African internationalism. African nationality is made real because African internationalists make it real. whatever lesser identities we have as a people, our primary guiding identity is African. The African nation is where we are, and we are everywhere. African internationalists recognize our responsibility to define ourselves as part of the struggle for our liberation. The imperialists, the white colonial capitalists claim their own national identity. And in the process of defining themselves, they define Africans as a necessary antipode to give their self-identity validity. African internationalism tells us that we have the responsibility to define ourselves as part of the struggle for our liberation. Our struggle, our identity is made real by us and the African Socialist International. The ASI deplores the advanced detachment, the vanguard of African liberation, and the African working class throughout the African world, on and off continental Africa. The African Socialist International is the practical political instrument for establishing the African nation wherever we are. We are not some imperialist defined creation. We are not hyphenated white people. We are not a portion of the territorial US South. We are not people of color. We are Africans, and we are Africa. Is related to Africa. We are Africans because we say we are. Early last year, the leaders of our party in neo-colonial South Africa or occupied Tanzania addressed this understanding in their plan of action for advancing our party work. It is a clear demonstration of the nation building project when under the leadership of African internationalists. From the plan of action that they provided, we quote, "The African Socialist International functions from a standpoint that clarifies science from philosophical idealism, which is a much needed dichotomy to draw up in occupied Tanzania, because South Africa has removed African people from political life and given our people an ideological basis for faith in imperialism, given Africans in South Africa the impression that other African people outside of this border are different from us. And in fact, that Africans in this border are not Africans, but some kind of people gracefully making the white man's burden easier by not being tied to Africa and African people above this false national identity. The importance of studying African internationalism on the continent helped us to see that it is not important to Africanize the countries like the Pan-Africanists suggest. That it is not worth the effort to be some kind of Azanian, excuse me, instead of South African. That happened in Rhodesia. It's now Zimbabwe. But the African working class still lives in Rhodesia. The conditions never changed, just the name. So African internationalism has designated the borders we are in as an impediment to African unity and development under the leadership of the working class, thus prompting us to see that the real South Africans are really the ones who stole our land and dispersed our people through slavery. African internationalism has shown us that Africa is more important than the artificial states built atop our Africa, meaning South Africa is a cancer on the body of Mother Africa, unquote. It's a great statement that came from the comrades in occupied Tanzania. It is part of the evidence of how African internationalism is giving African people worldwide a common perception of the world that is based on science. And African internationalist is the same in St. Petersburg, Florida, USA, as in Nassau, Bahamas, in the Caribbean, or as in Brixton, in England, or as in Everton West, in South Africa. We defined the African nation in my political report to our Sixth Congress published as an uneasy equilibrium We made a scientifically based African serving definition. Some people have problems when we say it's an African serving definition, as if definitions do not serve the interests of those who define. That's the power. That's what power is, the ability to define phenomena and to have it act in a predetermined fashion. We concluded that the definition of the nation is not just a purely abstract academic issue. We maintain that our conditions of existence today revolve around this critical question of the African nation and the nation in general. And we quote from this political report to the Sixth Congress. The quote, the material conditions Africans suffer worldwide have their origin in the attack on Africa that led to the capture of our national homeland and our people. You know, some people, you know, a lot of people have come to the United States, that settler colony that was created on the land of the indigenous people. In our party, we say that African people are the only people other than the indigenous people themselves who do not come to the United States looking for a better way of life. And we lost a better way of life as a consequence of being brought here. But I have been in meetings and conferences and movements that were designed to deal with contradictions that the United States was imposing on people around the world. In particular, I remember how when the United States was bombing and killing people in Iraq overtly, and we pulled together meetings. We built a really powerful movement here in the southeastern United States, opposing this war, this aggression. And it was a movement that all kinds of people participated in. We had opportunists and turns out Zionists, and there were people also like from Palestine. And we've always supported the struggle of the Palestinian people in a very serious way, more than we can talk about right now. But it was disturbing because at one point it became impossible for us to participate with some of these forces because some of them were middle-class Palestinians who came to the United States looking for a better way of life, so to speak. And they spoke from platforms talking about how the United States should be acting differently in terms of, instead of murdering people in Iraq and places like that, and in Palestine, because this is not Cuba, this is not, you know, some other place like that. And so while trying to protest American war in Iraq, they had to condemn Cuba, or they had to condemn some other revolutionary process of philosophy. And we couldn't participate with that. You know, you can't call yourself my friend, and because how can you talk about how bad Cuba is? How can you talk about how wonderful America is on a platform with African people who are colonized and experiencing the worst kinds of oppression imaginable right here in this country? But there are some Africans who are intellectuals, very smart people, who cannot unite with the concept of us being Africans worldwide, that we are one African people, because they too experience some benefit from this relationship with America. They can protest this or that about America. That's like many of the people who, so-called communists and Black nationalists, who ended up in the camp of Obama. They could protest some of the way America was treating people, but the emergence of Obama as the president, a presidential candidate, the president, then for them, it was like, there but by the grace of God, go I. You know, it's like, it's possible for us to be a part of this thing, even though we've never been a part of it. And some of them people who even protested Obama and protested people who did this find themselves in the same camp without necessarily realizing it, because that camp is influenced by the fact that they don't want to be considered Africans, and that Africa is a part of our reality, and we are as much a part of the reality of Africa as Africans who are on the continent of Africa. So we say that the material conditions Africans suffer worldwide, everywhere on earth, have their origin in the attack on Africa that led to the capture of our national homeland and our people. The material conditions and the housing projects in Philadelphia, USA, wherever, over the hill, in Nassau, Bahamas, the material conditions that we suffer have their origin in the attack on Africa that led to the capture of our national homeland and our people. Our poverty and susceptibility to ignorance, violence, and material want throughout the world, including in the US, the UK, and the rest of Europe, result from the material conditions of existence in Africa since its capture and partition. We also make the further more important point in this excerpt of what we mean by the African nation. I want to say, before getting that, some of us, even very smart African people, have not internalized what the impact of the attack and captivity, the attack on Africa and the captivity of the African continent and African people has meant to us. Other people say to us all the time, as do some of our own people, look at other people who have come here, the Chinese, the Japanese, and all this. They don't act like you. They're not poor. They're not living in ghettos, because they don't call Chinatown a ghetto. They don't call the communities where these folk live a ghetto, because the people themselves have not been so separated from their reality as Chinese, Japanese, and the rest of it. But Africans here, you can go to almost any place in the world. If there are 3 Chinese there's a Chinatown. There is a place where Chinese exist as Chinese. They don't have to be in China. But not Africans. This is a major assault that was made on Africans. And the fundamental component of that assault was the attack that allowed them to create thinking representatives that's supposedly from our community, from our people, very smart people. I've seen people, and I can name them, some of them, who are very smart, who've written books, and we all study and read these books, who expected that because they were so smart and they succeeded. This goes back 100 years or more. They succeeded in institutions created by white people for other smart white people, and they were better at it than the white people, like Du Bois. And yet, white people and white power did not accept. This guy studied in Berlin, Germany. This guy, studied in the best universities in this country, wrote incredibly important books and things like that. Became known to some people as some representative of the struggle for Black people and Black power. But he was somebody who was radicalized by the fact that they did not accept him. White power, white people did not accept him. And he fought for that. And we went so far as to say, don't just accept me, accept the smartest ones of us, accept the talented 10th of us, and we will run the rest of the African world for you. They're the ones who created the Pan-Africanist, modern political Pan-Africanist movement. That's the African petty bourgeoisie of a certain kind, alienated from itself, alienated from Africa, alienated from its own consciousness. This is what we're looking at here, and that's one of the things that happened to us, and it didn't happen to the Chinese in general, and it didn't happen to the Japanese in general, because neither the Chinese nor the Japanese experienced what Africa and African people have experienced. We are African internationalists. We have a responsibility to look out for Africa and for African people, and to advance the revolutionary movement that will liberate Africa and African people and take back our brains also that are under colonial domination. So we say that we also make the further more important point in this excerpt of what we mean by the African nation. I'm quoting now again from Uneasy Equilibrium, the political report to the Sixth Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. The African nation then is a community of people whose core identity is based on historical ties to the equatorial continent of Black Africa, contributing to a common culture, history, and physiognomy. Because physiognomy has become, it has been for a very long time, by the way, a material reality that has helped to define, give material definition, has in material power, influence on how the world is perceived, how we are perceived, and how we perceive the world. In fact, it was Marx who said that something to the effect that philosophy, when it grips the masses, becomes a material reality. And a material reality is physiognomy, Black people, Blackness. That's a material reality because of the philosophical connotations associated with it from the very inception of the rise of capitalism in the world, coming from slavery. And so what you have with colonialism is that the colonized have been so defined as to be people who are not white. In this country, people talk about how we're all in the same boat because all of us are workers, or many workers and women and gays and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now you can look at who is colonized, whether it's homosexual, woman, worker, or what have you. The colonized is defined in part. You know the colonized in part because you can see them. That's the badge that makes the cops stop you when they won't stop a quote unquote other worker. It stops you because you're colonized. It stops you because you're colonized sometimes even if you're not a worker. That's the colonial question that's asserting itself in the reality that we are confronted with as African people. It happens in Africa too. I've been in Africa where passports and things like that were being looked at, and where visas were being taken. And white people didn't have to have visas going into Black Africa. It may be changing a bit today, but that's been true. They show up without a visa, and a $10 bill will get them through. So again, the African nation then is a community of people whose core identity is based on historical ties to the equatorial continent of Black Africa, contributing to a common culture, history, and physiognomy. A common culture. I was looking at, for a moment, some show that was supposed to be showing where jazz came from. Or was it jazz or the blues? And it was it was originated in New Orleans, they said. And not only did it originate in New Orleans, what made it so powerful, perhaps it was jazz, one of the two. It was created by a combination of people. And the white people who were there and the Black people who were there and all these mixed people, that's where jazz come from, which is nonsense. I mean, the fundamental popular cultural expression throughout the Americas and including in the United States has been tremendously influenced by Africa. It's Africa. It's the African pulse runs throughout jazz, blues, every expression of music. If it weren't for that, I used to say, without the presence of Africans in this hemisphere, all music would sound like elevator music, but that's not true because even elevator music has its origin in Africa. So we say the African nation is comprised of all those African people who have been forcibly dispersed to various places in the world through colonial slavery. Dispersed Africans were part of the process of the development of capitalism and the European nation, a process that requires our subjugation and national incoherence. Additionally, the African nation is comprised of many who experience a sense of sameness, a subjective connection to Africa, mainly because of skin color that helps to define their imperialist-inspired, impoverished, and oppressed state of existence. The Dalit in India, the indigenous of Australia and other areas where the African presence goes back to earliest times, such as the Asia-Pacific region, are included in this category. Finally, the African nation can include people of other nationalities living in Africa who commit national suicide, becoming part of the African working class and abandoning all allegiance to a predatory colonial relationship to African people. The truth stated simply is we are Africans. Whatever else we may be called because we say we are Africans and we feel like we are Africans. Africa is the national homeland of all Black people worldwide. It is the land to which the identity of the African nation is firmly and irreversibly affixed. Our historical connection to Africa represents the critical element in the material basis for African nationality. For although we have been forcibly dispersed by colonial slavery and related factors subsequent to the initial attack, European attack on Africa, our current conditions of existence, both in Africa and abroad, are essentially defined by the consequence of our forced dispersal, unquote. Our party is the architect of the African nation under construction. We are this not only because we say we are, but because we are also the construction workers. Our revolutionary political work, let me say that again. Our party is the architect of the African nation under construction. We are this not only because we say we are, but because we are also the construction workers. Our revolutionary political work is organizing the forcibly dispersed African nation to active participation in creating the future for Africa and the world in which we will live. We are negating the 100-year-old life and liberty depriving imperialist reality through constructing its antipode. This is the relationship of theory to practice that must be understood, especially during this time of existential crisis of imperialism. Vanguard Up has practical significance at this moment. And it is especially true at this moment. Because during the crisis of imperialism, people are extraordinarily vulnerable, and charlatans and hustlers of all types abound. You go to social media now, you see people making as much money as they can off of COVID-19. That's how capitalism, imperialism works. You know, there's a crisis. How can we hustle up some resources? How can we trick and cheat somebody out of this and that? That's another reason why these political studies are so important, because all kinds of creeps worm their way into the party, into our midst and what have you. And it is extremely important for the members of the party, especially new party members, to be able to withstand the garbage nonsense that will find its way into our ranks. Is extremely important because the protection of the party ultimately and the revolution ultimately is the political consciousness and education of the masses of people who are in our party. We recognize that the African reality we are constructing must be done in the process of solving a myriad of political contradictions, not the least of which is the imperialist domination of Africans, especially in Africa, through the neo-colonialism that Kwame Nkrumah warned us about. The struggle against neo-colonialism is fundamental to genuine African liberation, unification, and development. On May 23rd, 1963, or was it May 25th? 57 years ago, May 23rd, 24th. 57 years ago, Ghana President Kwame Nkrumah made what was probably his most important political presentation in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, at the founding meeting of the misnamed Organization of African Unity. Nkrumah spoke of the contradictions confronting African liberation that it has been left to the African People's Socialist Party to resolve, and that this plenary will reiterate. Here's a short excerpt from Nkrumah's presentation, which is titled, "We Must Unite Now or Perish." It's an adequate title, even today. Quote, "On this African continent, it has not taken us long to discover that the struggle against colonialism does not end with the attainment of national independence. Independence is only the prelude to a new and more involved struggle for the right to conduct our own economic and social affairs, to construct our society according to our aspirations unhampered by crushing and humiliating neo-colonialist controls and interference. From the start, we have been threatened with frustration where rapid change is imperative, and with instability where sustained effort and ordered rule are indispensable. No sporadic act nor pious resolution can resolve our present problems. Nothing will be of avail except the united act of a united Africa. We have already reached the stage where we must unite or sink into that condition which has made Latin America the unwilling and distressed prey of imperialism after 1.5 centuries of political independence. As a continent, we have emerged into independence in a different age, with imperialism grown stronger, more ruthless and experienced, and more dangerous in its international associations. Our economic advancement demands the end of colonialist and neo-colonialist domination in Africa. But just as we understand that the shaping of our national destinies required of each of us our political independence and bent all our strength to this attainment, so we must recognize that our economic independence resides in our African Union and requires the same concentration upon the political achievement. The unity of our continent, no less than our separate independence, will be delayed, if indeed we do not lose it by hobnobbing with colonialism. African unity is above all a political kingdom, which can only be gained by political means. The social and economic development of Africa will come only within the political kingdom, not the other way around," unquote. Nkrumah's admonition at the OAU founding were generally unheeded at the time. The neo-colonialism that Nkrumah defined and fought so hard to define was actually consolidated on a continental basis at that OAU founding meeting that was hijacked by the wishes and machinations of parasitic imperialist predators. It was the meeting that codified the unity and progress prohibiting colonial borders that our party, like Nkrumah before us, is determined to eradicate. Unlike Nkrumah, however, we have the African People's Socialist Party, the advanced detachment of the African working class, and the organizational vehicle through which this is being accomplished. Also, unlike Nkrumah at the time, we know that the true liberation and unification of Africa and Africans will not occur as the achievement of neo-colonial heads of states, but of our revolutionary party based in the African working class. The opportunist neo-colonialism that functions as an agent of imperialism, as white power in blackface, must be removed with finality if the misery of our people is to be ended, and Africa and our people are to ever be free and prosperous. Africa for Africans at home and abroad. The deployment of US troops on African soil, enhanced with the establishment of the US Africa Command, or AFRICOM, is resulting in armed clashes that will serve to draw the US deep into an inescapable quagmire. The US and France are both actively engaged in military engagements spanning the continent. While these are generally secret wars unknown to much of the world outside Africa, occasionally the escalating conflicts break through the self-imposed censorship of bourgeois democratic colonialist media. France has long been a detested, blood-drenched colonial power in Africa and owes its affluence and influence, though declining, to the hundreds-year-long colonial looting expedition and the continued French military occupation of huge swaths of African territory. The growing resistance to French occupation in Africa recently made the news when in November 2019, Reuters reported that French President Emmanuel Macron publicly responded to the combat deaths of more than 13 French occupation troops in Mali by making an empty threat to pull French troops out of the African Sahel, implying that France has taken up the white man's burden in Africa. Macron demanded assistance from Europe to crush the growing resistance to continued French slavery, declaring, quote, "France is acting in the Sahel on everyone's behalf," unquote. Of course, parasite that it is, France cannot afford to leave Africa. To do so would cut off its lifeline. There are 14 so-called independent countries in Africa that continue to pay a colonial tax to France of 65% of their foreign reserves, something they have done since formal independence. When handling charges at a commercial rates are paid to France, the total taken from these territories is at least 85% of their gross domestic product. France cannot leave Africa except at the expense of its pretext of self-generated wealth and civilization. Every sidewalk cafe in France has African poverty and immiseration on the menu, not something easily given up by the French rulers or citizens. In October 2017, 4 US Special Operations troops were killed in Niger during a military encounter that has never been truthfully explained by US officials to the public. And as recently as early January 2020, 3 US forces were killed and several US aircraft and vehicles destroyed by African militants in Kenya. We have written more in the past about the armed US thugs marauding throughout Africa, murdering our people at will. These are the thugs which, when they are deployed in the US, are called police and serve the same purpose of colonial containment and domination. The point is, however, that more and more the imperialist forces are being drawn into Africa, where with the growth of the African Socialist International, the working class party, we will be able to coordinate a continental and global campaign from which they will not be able to live with colonialism and or their lives intact. The neo-colonial hobnobbing with the imperialist overlords deployed by Nkrumah will not be able to save imperialism and its minions from the organized African internationally ideologically armed African working class in pursuit of the future of our continent and our people in Africa and around the world. The 2, 3, many Vietnams that Che Guevara called for as the means to defeat US imperialism by forcing it to fight everywhere are to be found in Africa, where all the blood-sucking imperialist powers are greedily huddled together in anticipation of future looting. The capitalist state, as distinguished from prior European states, was spawned by European imperialism or empire. It was spawned by the process of capturing the lands and peoples that constituted the fodder of European development. This brought about the advent of capitalism as a parasitic life extracting growth on the body of Africa and the rest of humanity. The capitalist state is international in scope, and it represents itself in Africa in a slew of ways that includes NATO, the United Nations, and assorted peacekeeping and relief missions. However, the primary, most important expression of the white power capitalist state in Africa is the African governments. Their main role is to protect the parasitic relationship that starves and brutalizes Africa and facilitates the perennial transfer of African human and material resources to the coffers and bellies of condescending colonizers. This is neocolonialism, or indirect rule, that has been imposed on Africa at gunpoint. The African, mostly puppet regimes, do not represent the interests of African people, but those of the capitalist colonialist corporations and the African primitive petty bourgeoisie. Neither the borders nor the governments of Africa are legitimate, as they owe their existence and loyalty to imperialist white power and not to Africa and our people. The African Socialist International is the organization of the African working class, which, when it seizes power, will become the new socialist state, the workers in arms that will mark the beginning stage of the demise of capitalism on a world scale. We must make this point loudly and clearly. Africa for Africans at home and abroad. The 100-year-old pronouncement by Marcus Garvey has more significance now than ever. We will make that slogan a living demand by Africans worldwide through the work and presence of the African People's Socialist Party in every nook, cranny, and crevice of every territory in which we reside within the imperialist construct. This determination, especially when adopted by the masses, neutralizes the pretensions of the official borders. We have no borders, and our country is currently under construction by the African masses under the leadership of the advanced detachment. We are now at 9:31. I'm looking at the Director of Agitation and Propaganda to get an indication of whether we should end now on page 66 and field questions and discussions.
Yeah.
Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, well, I just really want to salute you for that amazing study and want to go ahead and open it up for questions and answers from our online audience and viewers. We want to appreciate everyone who's tuning in via Facebook and YouTube, and also appreciate all of your engagement. And also please continue to invite your friends and family to this study and share widely on all of your social media platforms. Of course, we like to acknowledge where people are watching from. We have people in St. Louis, Missouri, Clearwater, Florida, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Boston, Massachusetts, Chicago, Illinois, Virginia Beach, Virginia, Kuwait, Tampa, Florida, Newark, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Hampton, Virginia, San Diego, California, Oakland, California, Dubai, Huntsville, Alabama, Cincinnati, Ohio, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Louisville, Kentucky, Lagos, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, West Palm Beach, and Trinidad. We had a comment from Nasir in Kuwait, who says, as a professional counselor, the point of self-identifying, saying we are Africans because we say we are, is critical to an empowering identity formation. Only a Eurocentric psychology would see it otherwise. And currently, no current questions at the moment. So we're looking for people to, again, write your comments, your questions inside of the comment boxes on either Facebook or YouTube, so that the chairman can answer any of your questions right here live. And yeah, but currently we don't have any other questions, Chairman. So I don't know if you wanted to expound on anything until we get one.
I want to again express Congratulations to Comrade Asa in occupied Tanzania, that's called South Africa. He is the Secretary General of the African People's Socialist Party in occupied Tanzania, commonly referred to as South Africa. This does give me then an opportunity to say a few other things about South Africa, occupied Tanzania. So maybe I'll read just a bit more, Comrade Attila. And that's on page 66. We begin talking about building for the first International Congress in Tanzania in 2023. The party is still working to build the African Socialist International nearly 40 years after the 1981 First Party Congress held in Auckland, where the resolution was passed by party members that officially put us on this trajectory. After so many years of ups and downs, the African Socialist International is now solidly on the ground. Our organizational presence as a party has shifted from time to time, but we are here. Our ESI leading body is becoming increasingly competent. The work our party is doing throughout the US is real. We do exist and engage in political work in the Bahamas and Ghana, England, and various locations in Europe. The party's presence in neo-colonial South Africa is a major contributing factor to the growth and stability of the leadership structure of the African Socialist International. This leading structure also consists of representatives from Holland, France, England, Ghana, West Africa, the Bahamas, and the US. This is the structure that is carrying out the responsibility for building fronts or sections of the African People's Socialist Party as the African Socialist International throughout the world. In addition to its work to build the party's organized presence throughout the world, and especially the continent of Africa, the ESI leading body will begin preparing for our first International Congress in South Africa in 2023. It will be an historic, monumental event that will make the African Revolution, it will be an historic, monumental event that will take the African Revolution to never achieved heights. It will be critical to our practical work to build one, boarding and negating Africa and consolidating the African nation. We will do this because only the African People's Socialist Party can do this. We will do this because we can. And I wanted to just say that it gives us an opportunity to reiterate to the membership of the party and our movement and the world at large that we're going to South Africa with our first Congress in 2023. And we expect not only Africans inside South Africa, but from Africans throughout the continent and around the world to attend that Congress. It's going to be a really major fundamental event. And so I just wanted to have an opportunity just to read that portion of the political report, and it still can come back on page 66. I also wanted to say that some other developments at work now as it relates in part to the COVID-19 crisis that the world is experiencing. And part of that has to do with the fact that we have scheduled for April, we had scheduled previously from April 10th through the 12th, the Black is Back School, Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace and Reparations. We were having our electoral school on those 3 days. The first day, Friday, would have been a sort of meet and greet event. And then on the 11th and 12th, we would have had the actual school. We thought that it's extremely important to do that, especially during this election season. That won't be happening. The school has currently been postponed for June. And so that's what we're looking at. I want to make that announcement, and I think the Comrade Attila is signaling me.
Uhuru, Chairman. So people can still hear us on the live, but we can't actually be seen right now. So I just wanted to let you know that we're trying to resolve it from the back end. It just randomly lost being able to see you and I video feed, but we can still be heard. So we're still trying to work that out because we're not sure what happened or why Zoom is doing that. So we are, since we are still able to be heard, people are still tuning in the live, and we are getting questions. And also we did get one donation even from a Morty from Richmond, Virginia of $5, and wanted to salute you as well as salute the African People's Socialist Party and Agitprop Comrade Attila. So that was from Morty from Richmond, Virginia. And Comrade Penny Hess, the chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, says, Uhuru, Chairman, can you address why the liberation of Africa led by the African working class is the basis of true socialism for the whole world?
I'm sorry, can you read that again, please?
Yes. Uhuru, Chairman, can you address why the liberation of Africa led by the African working class is the basis of true socialism for the whole world?
Well, first of all, what we've come to understand through study and through our own work is that that capitalism itself is something that was founded on a pedestal of slavery and colonialism, and that the dispersal of African people throughout the world was a part of this process of consolidating capitalism. What that means in part is that the capitalists have the Europeans who initiated this capitalist building process has placed within its very entrails, its very intestines, its guts, the means by which it will be destroyed. That is to say, the African people who have been proletarianized or made into workers for European and white power everywhere around the world. And then, of course, Africa itself, where the vast majority of the resources necessary for functioning for modern societies, I say modern societies, but continue to exist. And it is through the overthrow of this relationship that we have, the destruction of the pedestal upon which all capitalist activity occurs, the pedestal that Marx referred to when he said that what he called wage slavery in Europe required as a pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. All capitalist activity that he refers to as wage slavery required as a pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. And that slavery is something that is reflected as colonialism everywhere. And it is the pedestal upon which all capitalist activity rests, no matter where, no matter how progressive an entity appears to be, no matter how progressive activity appears to be. When we see demonstrations in Greece or some other things against the existing ruling order and people cheer, wow, look at the workers, et cetera. These are workers who are fighting to maintain their place on this pedestal of African oppression and exploitation. So we say the working class, the African working class, is a critical component to destroying the pedestal upon which the capitalist system relies for its existence. We are its lifeblood, its life source. It cannot exist without that. We represent the fundamental host of a capitalist parasite. And so it's the liberation, and Africans, of course, being dispersed all around the world as we are. It means that we also resolve at the same time several other kinds of issues that appear to be conundrums for Marxists and others who consider themselves capitalists, solving the problem of so-called dilemma of socialism in one country, which is ridiculous, and saying we're not talking about socialism in one country, we're talking about an African revolution that is based throughout the world where African people are located involved in a single African revolutionary movement that has forces in the Bahamas or Caribbeans and in what is now known North America, whether that's Canada, the United States, Mexico, whether, and then of course we're talking about all over the continent of Africa, Australia, et cetera. So this is the real socialist revolution. It is the socialist revolution that negates the existence of capitalism, which again rests upon the foundation of slavery and colonialism. It can't exist without that, and only African working class can bring to fruition the struggle for socialism, which is a struggle to destroy capitalism. You can't have socialism and capitalism occupying the same social space. The reality is that socialism comes about as a consequence of destroying capitalism. And the African Revolution is the only force that can make this happen on a worldwide or global basis. So, I mean, I guess that's a kind of response to the question that was just raised, Uhuru.
Uhuru. So yeah, we're still working out the technical difficulties, but we did get another question from Comrade Mwambi in San Diego. It says, how can we use this current crisis to advance African internationalism globally and locally? And I'm guessing he's referring to, I don't know if it's specifically dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, but yeah, that's his question.
I mean, yeah, I want everybody to remember though, that, you know, we talked about the crisis of imperialism before COVID-19 reared its head, before that crisis revealed itself as COVID-19. We were talking about the crisis of imperialism. The political report to the 5th, 6th, 7th, where Congress, you know, talked about the crisis of imperialism. And so that is real. So, but the question that was just raised is a really important question, because as I mentioned earlier, I did call for the creation of a response by our party, the African Socialist International, and a People's War Commission was created and is headed up by Comrade Sister Dr. Aisha Fields. And we have established a process through, when followed through, clearly reveals not only the incompetence of the colonial governments. We just had a meeting yesterday of more than 100 people stretched across the world, most of whom attached to, well, all of whom were attached to the party and the movement. And you know, it's clear that the party is the entity that's functioning as the government, taking on providing real answers to these questions and these people. In other words, we are exposing ourselves as the legitimate representatives of the people, doing what the government should be able to do. The governments that take all of our money, all of our resources, can't deal with the kind of responses. They cannot provide the kind of responses that we have provided and we are providing on a daily basis. So part of what we do is that we negate the significance of we clarify, we demonstrate the insignificance of the federal government, of the colonial powers dealing with this, and put ourselves forward in a very clear way as the response that's necessary for our people. And we use this time to really advance questions and responses that the people, we show that we are the force that the people can rely on. And that's what we should be doing everywhere. That's what I was mentioning, how I saw comrades in our communities in Huntsville, Alabama. I saw a video where they were out posting our response on boards, on posts in our community, so that people can say, this is how you deal with this. And we're talking about our forces going door to door, preparing to go door to door, in some instances already going door to door, not only in the United States, but in South Africa, as it's called. So the point is that we see this as just another manifestation of colonial aggression and terror against our people. And just as we do with any other issue, we respond to this COVID-19 pandemic as the party as a means by which we, again, negate the significance of the colonial and neo-colonial authorities and show the genuine leadership that's coming from the African working class to its advanced attachment to party. Anyway, that's what I would offer up, on the top. And all the members of our party and our movement at various places throughout the world right now are providing leadership in the communities where we live for our people in terms of how to deal with this again current crisis of imperialism as it impacts on our communities. Uhuru.
Uhuru. So we did have, looks like we have two more questions. One from Comrade Ngone in Tampa. Says, salute chairman, will the concept of the nation state have to be destroyed in order to win the minds of the masses of hyphenated Africans? And that's from Comrade Ngone.
You said in Tampa?
In Tampa. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. I didn't. So I think that we are involved in the process of negating the significance of what is currently known as the nation state. But I think in order to do that, what has to happen first is a consolidation of the African nation state. And that's much of what's being talked about. What has to be destroyed is the concept of the bourgeois nation state. That has to be come under assault, because it's a definition that rests upon the subjugation of African people and other peoples around the world. So we have to attack that relationship. When you say who we are, like we always said that sometimes Europeans have a problem with accepting the fact that we are Africans, because we say, if we are Africans, then who the hell are you? Who the hell are they? That's the question. That's why there's some almost hysteria sometimes when we say we are African people, because they have to answer the question who they are. And I think that by saying that we are our own nation and that the African Socialist International is a part of the process of consolidating the nation state, that is the process of negating the bourgeois nation state and how it is perceived. That's what we have to do. That's our task. Uhuru.
Uhuru. All right, Chairman. And last question before we adjourn this, but this is from Comrade Amalia Attila of the African People Solidarity Committee. Says, Uhuru, Chairman, really appreciate this study. It seems like this current crisis of coronavirus has created more space for the revolution and for the African People Socialist Party and Uhuru movement leaders. Can we expect conditions to worsen in order for revolution to take place? That's the question.
Well, the thing is that there are certain requirements for revolution, and that one of them is crisis, and crisis abounds. There's no way you can get around the fact that there is imperialist crisis everywhere. It's been experienced everywhere. And this has created a real fragile situation for governments. That's why, in a country that used to brag about loving free speech, et cetera, and the market of ideas, et cetera, that's no longer the case, not in the United States. I mean, it's not the case in most places in the world, and especially in the United States, because it's a very fragile situation. I mean, they got nuclear weapons and all of that, but they can't stand a discussion around coronavirus. I've been cut off by Facebook. They've shut it down when I was talking about coronavirus and the basis and where it's likely to have come from. And we've seen other instances where people were flagged because they said something about coronavirus. And Facebook has sent people to what they consider the legitimate way of entities that will explain coronavirus. So they're in a very fragile situation. People can't have confidence in the government. They have more confidence in Walmart and the supermarket, their local supermarkets scrambling on their own than they can in the government. So I think that it is a really desperate time. But for revolution, there must be crisis. The bourgeoisie, the ruling class, must be incapable of ruling in the same old way. I mean, we're looking at that right now. We also, the people have to have come to the conclusion that anything is better than this, and are able to risk their lives in order to make change and transformation. And we see that from time to time. And by the way, we may have to see that imminently, because as the governments around the world are shutting down, taking all the space and the pretext of fighting against the coronavirus that they won't put up a damn clinic and testing sites to deal with. They are not going to concede that space ever again to us easily. Believe me that the state will not take away your right to assemble today and then give it, oh, the crisis is over, now everybody can get together. No, 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 it's not going to be like that. It's going to be, I mean, I'm saying they're going to put impediments, there'll be impediments stemming from this even after this current iteration of imperialist crisis is no longer here. You will see some iteration of restriction placed on the rights of the people in this country. So it's maybe soon that people have to mobilize and defy the kinds of regulations and put on movement and stuff like that by the government. So there has to be crisis, inability to ruling class to rule in the same old way. And in order for, and there has to be a willingness of the people. The people have to conclude that there's nothing worse than this and prepare to risk their lives. Like we've seen children in Palestine and children in Soweto who went up against the power of these settler colonial states while they were being shot at and killed. This is another factor. And then of course, the critical thing is the existence of a revolutionary party that's guided by advanced revolutionary theory. These are requirements for a revolution. And if you look at what's happening, whether or not this is deepening it, we say yes, deepening it, because our party is moving around the world, consolidating our influence in communities everywhere at the expense of the colonial system, the imperialist system that has been set up to govern and dominate our people and the world. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman, so much for, again, the study and for answering these questions. And I just want to say, you know, on behalf of the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, that we're self-critical that, you know, this is happening during the study. And, you know, we are in the process of rapidly trying to investigate the best platforms to bring you this type of information, to bring you this study during, you know, this whole pandemic. You know, we obviously had to transition to this type of platform for the purposes of you know, this situation, but we are really working tirelessly to try to figure out the best platform to bring this to you. So we will rectify this going forward. But because of time, we want everyone to know that if your question was not answered, one of our moderators will correspond with you and make sure that the chairman sees your question. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For revolutionary news and analysis, visit theburningspear.com. Revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune in to Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. Did you unite with what you heard today and want to learn more about how you can get involved with the African People's Socialist Party? Visit apspuhuru.org for all information regarding how you can apply. Order your copy of Chairman Amalia Attila's latest book, Vanguard, The Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, the political report to the Seventh Congress of the African People's Socialist Party at burningspearmarketplace.com. The Uhuru Solidarity Movement's National Convention themed Reparations Uprising, previously scheduled to happen in St. Louis, will be taking place on an online platform on April 18th and 19th. To register for the convention, please visit uhurusolidarity.org/register. The Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations has postponed its 4th annual electoral campaign school to June 13th and 14th. Registration details for this event will be made available on blackisbackcoalition.org, but BIBC will be conducting a webinar on the elections and COVID-19 on April 11th and 12th with the BIB steering committee members. The African National Women's Organization has rescheduled the Black Women's Convention for July 10th through the 12th. Registration details and further information can be found at ANWO, that's ANWO, uhuru.org. We are doubling our efforts during this time to bring you timely and accurate information to keep African people all around the world prepared and protected dealing with COVID-19. In the meantime, please follow closely the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project, that's APDEP, on Facebook, or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to COVID-19. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru.